God. Well, welcome to the day after Towrah. My pleasure to be with you. We're here in our library studio. This is the Yahweh blog. I'm your host, Craig Wynn. We're continuing our story on Qatsyr harvest because, well, even though this year's Taruw'ah has come and gone, there will be 7 more before the final fulfillment of Taruw'ah, and it is the most spectacular day on Yahweh's calendar, and so I want you properly prepared for it. I want everyone to know as much as they can possibly know. Just a quick introduction before we begin our show today. The last few days have really been extraordinary as it relates to what is happening around our world, and as it pertains to really the destruction of the world as we're watching it take place. We are literally in the eye of prophecy. This is exactly what the prophets Yowel, Yahshua, what Gabriel said through Daniel. It is all just coming to materialize right on schedule. They told us when it would occur, that it would begin at this time, how it would transpire, what was going to happen to Israel and Jews and the world at large, and who was going to be the primary player as the Satan incarnate to make all this occur. And, you know, we watched something that was diabolical on Sunday. I think more than 100 million people tuned into that Fiasco pertaining to Charlie Kirk. You know, you had a miserable anti-Semite and Carlson Tucker Carlson, speaking about blaming Jews for the assassination of Kirk and even blaming Jews for the crucifixion of the mythical Christ, not recognizing that by repeating that story, all he's really doing is impugning the credibility of the Christian New Testament because it claims it, and it is obviously untrue. I mean, not only didn't Jesus ever exist, he is nothing but a product of identity theft, but in first century Roman-occupied Judea, the Romans were the ones who crucified. If somebody was crucified, they were crucified by the Romans, who became the Roman Catholic Church. So the Christian concept of blaming Jews for killing their God is absurd in every possible way. And that's what Tucker still promoted and Christians applauded. And it's ludicrous. First of all, God can't be a man. Second of all, men cannot kill God. Third, if there was crucifixion, it was perpetrated by the Romans, not by the Jews in Roman-occupied Judea with the Roman method of capital punishment. And of course, the reason the Christian New Testament goes to so much trouble to lie and to make it put itself at risk by lying is that without demeaning and dehumanizing Jews so that they could plunder and rob Jews of their inheritance and of all promises made to Jews, there is no basis for Christianity. There's no basis for the New Testament. There's no basis for any aspect of a Christian church if you don't turn the God of the Jews into the God who hates the Jews. And, well, the myth that the Jews killed the Christian God, I guess, was the trick that convinced many that Yahweh, whom they don't know, all of a sudden became a liar and turned on the people that he said that he had chosen. Such is the myth of Christianity. And that wasn't the worst speech. No, the worst speech was by the Donald Dumpster, who used the occasion to proclaim his greatness and confabulate all manner of lies that had nothing to do with Charlie Kirk. But one of the things it did point out is that Charlie Kirk was very little more than a pimp for MAGA and for Donald Trump. So, if you're a pimp for a man who is a sexual predator, who is a pedophile, who is a rapist, who is a confabulator, who says every week things that are just utterly absurd, then there's something wrong with you. You're not a good man when you're promoting the most evil man on the planet. So it was just if I were to use Yahweh's terminology, we would call it a shit show. And then Trump says that he was going to have a major announcement about autism. And everybody was able to anticipate what he was going to say. And he went off on this tirade about Tylenol and made an absolute and utter fool of himself. First of all, there's absolutely no correlation of any kind between Tylenol and autism. None. There have been very professional, double-blind clinical trials. The most recent taking place in Sweden, where 2.5 million people were part of this study. I mean, one of the largest studies ever. And what they found is that there is absolutely no correlation between Tylenol and autism. None. And what they did find, I'm sure that the moms of autistic children don't want to hear, but what they found is that the only correlation was the mental condition of the woman, whether the woman suffered from one form of mental illness or another, or anxiety, or these kinds of things, that it was the mothers who were passing on autism to their children. And I know that's not popular to hear, that anxiety and depression and these kinds of things was the only correlation, and that the increase in autism would be from an increase in the well-being and the mental attitude and aptitude of women today. But that's what the study found. But during that whole thing, Donald Trump was a complete and utter nincompoop. And then he wanted to go after vaccines. And as I have shared with you on many programs, and I shared with Rich yesterday, if you look at scientific and medical advancements and contributions to humankind, it would be hard to find anything that has been overall as beneficial to humanity as vaccines. Like all forms of medicine, they are not perfect. There is nothing we have ever invented that is perfect. But when you look at the cost-benefit analysis of vaccines, they are principally responsible for us going from a planet of about a couple of billion people to a planet of 8 billion people. That has hugely improved life and has all but eliminated many of the worst diseases known to man. And some it has eliminated. And vaccines are an amazing contribution to society. And the MMR vaccine has nothing to do with autism. That earlier report was completely rebuked because it was promoted by a charlatan who wanted to profit from his personal investment in an alternative to the MMR vaccine. And it was completely repudiated. And yet to repeat it, as they did in that press conference, is disgusting and irresponsible. It's the stuff of the worst of conspiracies. And then from that, we have Donald Trump making what may be the worst speech ever, where he was auditioning for King of the World at the United Nations. Now, this was a conference on the fate of the Fakistinian state, on whether or not it should be carved out of Israel. And he made the whole thing about his life story, about how he was this glorious real estate developer in New York City. And the fact is, he wasn't. He did more to destroy the wealth that he had inherited than he did actually build it. But he wants to tell the story of how he was this great real estate developer. He told the story of how his bid was not accepted to renovate the United Nations, and then how he is the best answer for the world on all that ails the world, and condemning nation after nation to hell is what he did. It was total confabulation. There was really no correlation between reality and what Donald Trump said, and it was frightening and embarrassing for the world and for the United States, even for that organization, which I despise, to have a speech of that, complete departure from reality and just a journey down egotistical trail. But that wasn't the worst thing that happened. I mean, in a week of just horrible things, that wasn't actually the worst. No, not by a long shot. The worst is the Truth Social post that Donald Trump put out today, or late yesterday, I can't tell you which one, after his meeting with Zelensky, where he talked about Zelensky being this great fighter and brave fighter. Now, Zelensky hadn't fought for anything. No, 1.8 million Ukrainians have died. Now, I have cited that because I studied the subject and read and listen to the experts in the field on this, who have stated that about 135 Russians have died, most in the first month from the Wagner Group, and that the death toll on Ukrainians is 1.8 million. There was a internal document from the Ukrainians that actually admitted this, released yesterday. And even in the light of that, Donald Trump said in Truth Social that the Ukraine is winning the war, and that Russia is floundering and getting nowhere, and that with the more American weapons, that the Ukraine will not only recapture the territory the Russians have brought under their control, but will push the Russians out of Ukraine, and they will actually pursue the Russians into Russia itself. And you just think, so that President of the United States just said, we're declaring war on Russia. We're going to invade Russia. We're going to provide the weapons to kill Russians. And all based on utter lies. And the fact of the matter is, it's the United States, going back all the way to the Bush administration, that started this war in the Ukraine. It has been a systematic plot, an immoral and disgusting plot. And I have shown the documentation of this, so have many others. Over the years, I began to talk about how stupid this war was and how this war was inevitable way back in my Shattering Myths days, when we were doing the syndicated radio program. It was a very long time ago. I've been pursuing this longer probably than anybody in terms of demonstrating what was going to happen and saying that if this is not careful here, this is going to lead to world war. And that's what Donald Trump announced yesterday. Now, by the way, I don't give a hoot. The reason I don't care is that we as covenant are kept out of it. And we know that this is going to happen. And the very fact that it confirms what the prophets have discussed, and it puts the world in you have your backs up against the wall. You can't trust any politician. You can't trust any religion or religious leader. You can't trust your military. And if you want to survive this, there's only one way out of this planet alive, and that happens to be Yahweh. And so it puts the world in the very position that Yahweh said, I'm not going to cause these wars, but I know what's going to happen, that this is such a horrible situation. We're entering the time of Jacob's troubles. We were told exactly when we were going to enter it. I've been talking about it for a very long time as to when we were going to be in this period of the time of trouble. And everything has materialized exactly as we have discussed because of the fact that we knew what the prophets had to say. So when we see it materialize around us, we're not going to shed a tear. We warned people about it, and now we're telling you there's only one way out of it. But what Donald Trump had to say in his Truth Social release was, absolutely revolting. He claimed to now understand the situation and then lied about everything. And one of two things is true. Either Donald Trump's dementia, which we've been talking about for some time, and his confabulation, which is a psychiatric disease where there is no correlation between what a person believes and says and reality, and or his demon possession, which we said took place after he lost the last election, the election prior to this one, and then lost every court case. That his demon possession, his overall mental state has put him in a position, along with the ongoing dementia and confabulation, to a point where collectively he just says stupid stuff for no other reason than he wants to pretend like he is the Lord of the world and controls everything. And now he's going to take it to Vladimir Putin, since Putin didn't surrender when they had their meeting in Alaska. And so that's a possibility. It's just utter stupidity and mental illness that has caused Trump to be in that position. The other is, it is actually part of a plan, and the plan is for the world to be at war so that the 2028 elections do not take place, and that Trump can stay as king of the United States and impose his will on the world. One of those two, take your pick. But the combination of those events, rest in peace, world, because you're dead. If I were Vladimir Putin, and I'm a fairly reasonable guy, Putin is a fairly reasonable guy, I would respond to Donald Trump's threat with an open letter that I would write to the leading newspapers of Europe and to the United States, and then I would read it as a video post that can be put on the news feeds around the world. And I would systematically go through, as I have in the past, and explain how the war in the Ukraine came to be, and how it's a very evil, immoral American plot to slice Russia up so that the United States can control it and control its resources. Systematically show how that occurred. And then demonstrate that Russia's response was to protect the ethnic Russian regions in the east that were being terrorized by the regime change government that the United States put in place, and that the Russians really had no choice. Plus, it was the Cuban Missile Crisis played by idiots this time. And to show that Russia really had no choice, that Russia had to protect the sovereignty of its nation and do what it did. And that it has been very patient in just taking over the ethnic Russian areas, and has done everything it can to make itself open to negotiating a settlement, and had 2 years ago negotiated and agreed to it. And it was the United States and the UK that told Ukraine not to accept it. And that now there's only one choice, which is not only to win that war on the battleground, which means eventually replacing the Zelensky regime by going into Kiev, but also the Russians are almost certain now to take Odessa and to put a buffer between them and Ukraine in the north, and to solidify and enlarge their gains in the east. They don't want anything to do with the Western Ukraine, but they need to defeat this regime, and they're very close to doing it, because the Ukrainians have no troops left to fight. Doesn't matter what kind of weapons they're given, there's no fight in them. But beyond that, what I would say is that because the European heads of state are threatening Russia and are declaring war on Russia, that any European nation that provides troops or that provides weapons that can or are used to harm Russians in Russia, that Russia will absolutely and unequivocally, putting on the Russians on record right now as saying that if the UK, if France, Poland, Germany, and I don't think Poland's this stupid, but the other three are, or the United States, provides weapons or manpower that is used to invade or attack Russians, that Russia will retaliate in those countries, and that it has the weapon systems that those countries cannot defend themselves against, and that they have no fight or no battle with the citizens of those countries, but absolutely with the leadership of those countries. That's what I would say. And I would make it unequivocal. So the world really is in a horrible position right now, and it's being led by insane people from around the globe, with none worse than Donald Trump. So I want you to know this is where you are. And I would say that probably the second worst leader in the world is Netanyahu. He's being afforded more and more weapons by the United States, and I think it is that the U.S. is playing Netanyahu just as did the Muslims who invaded on 10/7. Muslims on 10/7 didn't invade with 4,000 people on motor scooters and on foot, thinking they were going to take over Israel. They did it to make Israel so angry that Netanyahu would invade Gaza and destroy it, which is what he has done. Because by destroying Gaza, Israel has destroyed its standing in the world. And in this world, unless you are in Yahweh's protective custody, in Yahweh's hands, which Israel is not, you can't survive alone. And that's where Israel is. And the United States is continuing to give Israel more weapons for two reasons. One is it wants Israel in the position where when the United States finally says, listen, what you've done in Gaza is so egregious that we can't even stand with you anymore. And the United States is going to betray Israel based upon Israel's own actions. And the second reason, and when they do that, then the United States is no longer beholden to any deal that's made with Israel previously, and it's a much better position to deal with the Muslims that want Israel destroyed anyway, and they have the oil reserves. The second reason is that I'm convinced that the United States and Great Britain and others want Israel to re-engage in a war against Iran because they want access to and control over Iranian natural resources. And now with China and Russia firmly defending Iran, that war will be absolutely destructive for Israel. Israel couldn't win the war anyway. And I think that Netanyahu is going to be in a position where after he has completely destroyed Gaza City, and it's obvious that he lost the war, both the war of public opinion and also the war of eliminating Hamas, because Hamas will still be in Gaza, that he, to stay in power, is going to need another war. And I think he's going to go back after Iran, because I think that's where the United States is weaponizing him to do. And it'll be a disaster. So I think we're going to have a war there. I think we could very easily have a war in Venezuela, where the Russians and the Chinese are both backing Venezuela, and in Iran, where the Russians and Chinese are backing Iran. And I could see that the Islamic nations are going to rally together after what Israel has done, justifying their attack in unison against Israel. And should they do so, not only would Russia and China be on the side of all of the Islamic nations, but so would the United States. So I think that's what we're looking at now, and I think it is a devastating position for Israel to be in. But that's exactly what the prophets foretold, is it not? All right, so God's alternative for this is to incline your ear and to walk to me. Listen to God and walk to him. There's only one path that is delineated to walk to God. It is through the Moed Mikre, and it begins with the doorway to life that is Passover that Dowd, David, fulfilled in his second of 3 lives. Across the threshold that removes our guilt, where Dowd took our guilt and deposited in Sheol during Matsah, so we could look perfect before God, and then becoming part of the covenant family, enriched and empowered on Bikurim. And that path continues with the next harvest of saved souls, which, of course, Christians have no idea hasn't been fulfilled, because they think that Shabuw'ah was fulfilled as Pentecost, and that was the dumbest presentation, I think, ever. I mean, the Quran has some dumb stuff, so does Mormonism and Scientology, but the Christian presentation by Luke through Peter of Pentecost, on a 1 to 10 scale of dumb, is probably 100. So they think it's going to be on Taruw'ah, not recognizing that Taruw'ah is only for Yehudim and Israelites, and doesn't include any Goyim, and there will be no Christians on either harvest either. And yet, they're all saying, oh yeah, the next couple of days, man, we're all going to go on the rapture. Paul lied. Get over it. Not going to happen. Anyway, Taruw'ah is the next harvest. That's the harvest we just celebrated. And that leads to Kippurim, which is where Yahweh, not Jesus, returns with Dowd, the actual Messiah, Son of God, and returning King. God is absolutely clear that he is returning with Dowd, and to suggest otherwise is to call God a liar. And then we move to Sukkah, where we get to camp out, and the conditions return to Eden for 1,000 years here on earth. So choose to actually listen so that your soul may continue to exist, because that is the only method for that to happen. And then Yahweh uses a term, and I think the last time I did this program, Mike Beati did a nice presentation of karat. Karat is a term that is about 90% negative. It means to cut away, to cut out, to kill, to exterminate, to eradicate, to eliminate. Karat, only positive connotation pursuant to the covenant is that Yahweh is cutting a line in the sands of space and time, and saying, you either cut into this covenant or cut out of this covenant, and the vast preponderance of you are cut out of this covenant. And it is just very clear that what God is saying here is that he does not want the majority of people, or even a significant percentage of people, to be part of his covenant family and infecting forevermore. And so he's far more, I'm going to cut you out of than I'm going to cut you into. But for those who walk to him along the path he has provided through the Moed Mikre, and acknowledge Dowd's fulfillment of the verse 3, and Dowd's return on the 6th of them to live with and camp out with our King and our Father on the 7th of them, and who capitalize on the 2 harvests that are on the 4th and 5th of them, that those individuals will be cut into the everlasting and one and only covenant, this family relationship that God has presented in his Torah with and through Abraham, that he's fulfilling with Dowd. And it says, which was affirmed and verified with unremitting and unfailing devotion by Dowd. And by saying that the covenant was fulfilled, was enabled, was verified by the love and compassion of Dowd, that means that Dowd fulfilled the 3 Moed Mikre that provide the benefits of the covenant. And that's the very path that God says, you should walk to me if you want to participate in this. And you listen to him by reciting the Torah, that the very fact that this is through Dowd means there never could have been a Jesus. That Jesus is nothing but a complete and utter fraud, that the most popular religion in the world is not only based on a lie, it's based on a hideous lie that robs God's people and God himself of the most important person in the world, our former and returning King, the actual Messiah and Son of God, our Savior, Dowd David. I don't think there's any declaration that's more important for you to process. And yet here it is, right out in the open. And yet for the past 2,700 years, no one ever noticed it. Dowd is the savior. He is the exemplar of the covenant. He is the enabler of the covenant. And he is our savior. And to say anyone else is a savior, like pretending that there was a Jesus and that he somehow saved, is to call God a liar. It's a very bad idea. God hates with a passion Christianity and its New Testaments. Why? 666 years before Paul wrote his first letter, where he perpetrated the lie, the counterfeit, the identity theft of Dowd as the mythical Jesus Christ. 666 years prior to that, he told the world that Shaul, Paul, was the plague of death. So your decision regarding the words that you're listening to will determine the fate of your soul. If you want to continue to live, God has told you how. Recognize what he has achieved through Dowd. Listen to him and capitalize on what Dowd and Yahweh accomplished together by fulfilling Pesach, Matsah, and Bikurim. That will determine whether or not your soul continues to exist or not. So if we were to condense Yahweh's Torah and covenant into a single thought, you've just heard it. And if you have a religious proposal that conflicts with this based upon a mythical Jesus Christ and a New Testament, well, the very best that you can hope for is that your soul dissipates into nothingness at the end of your life because you were deceived. But if you promote it, if you criticize what God is saying here, you attack me for bringing this to your attention. If you are an advocate for the lie of Jesus Christ, then your soul is absolutely, unequivocally headed to Sheol, hell. So these are the stakes. When you pretend that the God of the Torah, prophets, and Psalms, the God of Yisrael, not only authorized the mythos of a Jesus Christ who never existed, but that God became a man, that God was capable of being a man, and that God was capable of being killed. You have gone to the point where all I can say of you is you're headed to hell if you promote that lie. And you've squandered your soul if you believe it. So let it be known. Yahweh is offering to give us what he achieved with his beloved son, and his beloved son name is Dowd. All we have to do is listen and respond. This is we have to walk to him along the path he has provided, but that is what he means by responding. This is the message Yisrael and Yehuda most need to hear because they're not listening either. It's God's disgust for the founder of Rabbinic Judaism, Akiba, promoting a false Messiah that led to the diaspora with Bar Kokhba is every bit as reprehensible as the Rabbi Paul promoting the myth of Jesus Christ as a false Messiah. While Dowd is an enduring and restoring witness, he spoke and wrote on behalf of Yisrael. He was not a person whose message was read much outside of Israel, unless it's just to corrupt it as it is in Christianity or in Islam. Further, calling the king of the universe, is the term that we're going to read here, neged, is wrong. A neged is a prince, not a king. A neged is someone who is authorized to lead, but on Dowd's case, he's the sovereign of the universe. They're not in the same realm. It's like those who are mistaken and would pretend that the Choder, which is a stem, pertains to Dowd, when Dowd is the Shemek, the mighty branch of the tree of lives. They aren't comparable. It's as different as the greater and lesser luminary of the fourth day of creation, where the greater luminary is equated to the sun, the source of light, Dowd, and the lesser luminary is equated to the moon, which reflects the sun's light, but has no light of his own, simply reflects the light of the greater luminary. That's the difference here. So the Neged is Dowd's Bashar Herald, could be the Nakar, the observant foreigner as we go forward. It could be the final of the three Zeroahs, but this gift, while Dowd is the ultimate son who was given to us, and his fulfillment of Pesach, Matzah, B'Kodim are the greatest gifts ever. In this next line, Yahshua is speaking about the one who would tell you about the contribution of Dowd. He reads, "Behold, I bestowed him as a gift, an enduring witness to the restoring testimony, to people of every ethnicity and culture, an authorized leader, publicly promoting the truth, this Neged, as an instructor for an archaic and misled world." Yahshua, Isaiah 55:4, and God has done this very thing, and Yahshua knows it. So there have been a number of epiphany moments in our time together. One of these occasions occurred many years ago as I was making the transition from observations and Yahshua, Isaiah, to coming home and the Mizmor Psalms, where we came to realize that Dowd's was the Messiah and Son of God, our former and returning King, and indeed our Savior, and that he volunteered to fulfill Pesach, Matzah, and B'Kodim, and that God supported his decision for entirely rational reasons. He is the central figure in Yahweh's story, the most brilliant and articulate man who ever lived. He is the Son of God. He is the Messiah. He is the returning King of Kings. He is the one who rabbis allowed Christians to rob to create the counterfeit caricature of Jesus, which they then used to bludgeon God's people. Now, this was a giant leap forward in our understanding of Yahweh's redemptive message to his people. I would classify it as the single greatest discovery pursuant to God ever made. And that would come 5 years later, after rewriting some 30 volumes of Yada Yahowah, to incorporate what we had learned about the Messiah. We discovered the greatest treasure ever behold by man. Dowd was more than Messiah and King, more than firstborn Son of God, more than Yahweh's chosen one and his most set apart. Dowd is the Zeroah, the sacrificial lamb. It was Dowd who by choice fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and B'Kodim in year 4000 Yah, 33 CE. And so today, Shabuw'ah and Taruw'ah exist to capitalize upon what he has done and to restore the family. And this all leads to a wonderful celebration of reconciliation on Yom Kippurim in year 6000 Yah, 2033. And while it has always been apparent that Dowd is returning to protect his people and to serve as sovereign of Sukkah, no one heretofore had come to realize that Dowd will have lived 3 lives, just as he was anointed 3 times. And it was the failures of his first life and the responsibilities of the third that convinced Hamashiach to serve as Ha-Zeroah in his second coming. Now, this known, none of it mattered because no one knew. He offered the greatest gift in the history of the universe, and it mattered nothing because no one knew. Therefore, Yahweh is speaking through Yahshua to awaken Goyim and Yisrael to the voice of Dowd's herald, to the lesser luminary, to the man who is the Nakar, the observant foreigner, who is reintroducing not just Yahweh's name to the world, but reintroducing the Messiah to the planet and to his people. I don't know if I can overemphasize how important that is, how essential it is for you to know that, for you to recognize how important that is relative to our mission together, how unique this position is in the whole of time. The implications are world-altering, soul-transforming. When it comes to our salvation, no matter the question, Dowd is the answer. He not only fulfilled the first three mikra, these invitations to be called out of this world and to meet with God, he also provided the only eyewitness accounts of what he ultimately endured to facilitate our redemption. The only eyewitness account of the fulfillment of Pesach, Matsah, and Makodim were written with Dowd's own hand 1,000 years before he fulfilled them. He specifically described how crucifixion kills. 700 years before crucifixion even existed. He talked about his journey into Sheol, hell, with our guilt, so that we would appear perfect in God's eyes. He spoke of how the set-apart spirit protected him in Sheol, his soul, and how his soul was reunited with his father on Bokurim, because he was the Bokor, firstborn son of Yahweh. He not only did those things, but through Daniel as Gabriel, God's most capable and courageous man, the second most frequent term used to describe Dowd, most frequent being Shemach branch. That Dowd, in that visit in 555 BCE, revealed the exact date, some 600 years in advance, that he would arrive and complete the fulfillment of Chag Matzah, providing the exact day that Chag Matzah was completed by him in 33 CE, which is year 4000 Yah. The exact day, almost 600 years in advance. And the world yawns. Dowd provided the eyewitness. He provided the prophecy. And he wrote about these things and spoke of them in first person. He is everything Jews should await and that Christians should opine, and infinitely more. Simply stated, by working together, Father and Son have made life within the covenant family possible for everyone who acknowledges and accepts what they have accomplished together. But make no mistake, Dowd was the firstborn son of Yahweh. He was anointed by Yahweh as the Mashiach. He was chosen by Yahweh. He was the most set apart. And he, in his second of three lives, offered his corporeal body in that life to fulfill the role of the Passover lamb, and then he subjected his nephesh soul to our guilt so that he could carry it into Sheol to deposit it there, never to be seen again, enabling Bokurim, firstborn children. But Dowd is not and was not God. This myth of God being a man is pagan and it is despicable. It's demeaning to God. This very notion that Jesus was a God is hideous. And even worse, to quote Shabuw'ah, God, you cannot die. This notion that men killed God, preposterous. The idea that a bodily resurrection, which is Dionysian, is conquering death is just utterly stupid. The only thing that is a benefit when we die is that our physical bodies are no longer needed or useful, and they're no longer a liability. Our souls are now enveloped in spiritual energy like light, and as such, we can navigate through the fourth, fifth, sixth, and into the seventh dimension. We become immortal. We become empowered. We become enriched. It is the equation of E equals MC squared. And that just gets you into the fullness of the fourth dimension. It's even beyond that in the fifth and the sixth and into the seventh. Bodily resurrection is utterly reprehensible. The very thing you want to do is get rid of these because you aren't going anywhere. The universe is a waste for you so long as you have one of these. You are precluded from entering Shamayim in the seventh dimension while you have one of these. Just every aspect of the lie of Christianity. And to perpetrate this lie, what Paul did is he misquoted Yahweh on every occasion. Every citation that Paul used to promote the myth of his mythical Jesus Christ, this product of identity theft, took something God said out of a context that said exactly the opposite of what Paul was claiming. And then Paul did what Satan did in the garden. He changed a word or two in that statement to give the antithesis meaning to what God had actually conveyed. And it's that way with every single citation. Except, by the way, he never, ever cites gospel Jesus. You know why he can't cite gospel Jesus? Because gospel Jesus didn't exist. There were no gospels. Gospel is Paul's term. And the first of them was written 10 years after Paul died. At Paul's instructions, by the way. It is just such a reprehensible lie and calls God a liar on every possible occasion, and it demeans God and it twists his testimony. It's worse than what Satan did in the garden. But of course, this means Jews are not condemned by God for failing to recognize Jesus Christ as a Messiah or as the Son of God, and they certainly didn't kill him because he's a fable. Their mistake was failing to acknowledge that Yahweh had provided the Messiah and the Son of God as the Passover lamb. That was their mistake. And it means that Jews should not be looking for the arrival of an unknown Matsah to rescue them, but instead eagerly anticipating Dowd's return on Kippurim as the relationship is reconciled and he returns with Yahweh. Now, while these conclusions are obvious and rationally undeniable, like billions before me, I had also been deceived into believing that the prophecies were actually written to draw our attention to the life and lyrics of a man who wrote nothing, Jesus. And I feel totally embarrassed that there was a period of my life where I went along with Paul's lies and thought, oh yeah, it must be speaking of Jesus. And you realize, oh my God, how could I have been that stupid? And then I said, okay, I'll change his name. In fact, now I see so many people doing this. I was maybe the first to do it. I did it, now 20 years ago. That I said, okay, if I could just change the name Jesus, because there was obviously no J until the 17th century, and no one could be called a Christ because, well, it's based on the verb chura, which means to drug. And if it's a title, it has to be Matsah or Messiah. And that Jesus was a fictitious name that is very similar to Zeus. And so why don't we just come up with a different name? We'll call him, how about Yosha? And so I coined that name as, well, maybe that'll help. But it doesn't help. It's just renaming a fictitious character that's a product of identity theft under another made-up name. And I did so at the time because I couldn't fathom, even though deep down I knew, having read the Torah, that David had to be the one who fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Makodim. I couldn't imagine Dowd volunteering to do it. I couldn't imagine God allowing it to happen. So I just said, no, I'm going to come up with this Yosha, and somehow that God used his soul as an avatar to do these things. And of course, it didn't make any sense. God's not going to use his self as an avatar and allow Rome to beat him to death. And God can't go from the place of separation from himself. And he most certainly can't fulfill firstborn children if it's himself that is projected. It was nonsense. But what were you to do? And society is so conditioned with the absurdity of this lie of Jesus and the New Testament. And so many people believe it. And it's so pervasive in our society to recognize that person never existed. And then to realize that, wait a minute, Dowd explained why he figured this out, how he figured this out, why he volunteered to do it, and his reasons were rational. And it's easy to see why God allowed him to do it, because it was good for everyone, including for Dowd, to do this. And I've shared so many times previously with you exactly how Dowd figured out that he should volunteer for this, and why he knew it was in his interest and his people's interest and in God's interest, and therefore why God agreed with him and said, we're on the same ground here. It's right for you to do this. And how God provided a corporeal body and a second of 3 lives for Dowd to sacrifice as a Passover lamb, and then protected his nephesh soul as he carried our guilt into Sheol, and how beautiful that solution is, so that Dowd became the Bakor, firstborn son, on Bakurim. It's a marvelous, consistent, beautiful, totally wonderful explanation of God's actual plan. So this portrait was actually painted by our Matsah, writing in first person about how he would experience all of this as the Zeroah. And the reason Dowd wrote about what he would endure to save us from ourselves in first person is because, well, he actually endured it in first person, making it all possible. So once this treasure was revealed and confirmed, and I was able to analyze all aspects of it, I realized the sharing what Yahweh had achieved through this man, through Dowd, delineating what can be known about their relationship and demonstrating, therefore, that the entire Christian New Testament was trash. And now those 5 volumes, this happens to be volume 2 of 5 of Twistianity, where I proved that there is nothing in the Christian New Testament that's true, that all of it is rubbish. But you have to do that so that people are finally in a position to appreciate that it was Dowd who accomplished these things. So it became the preeminent mission of my life to share this with the world. So you, by listening to it, could also have a relationship with Yahweh. That you could follow Israel's king into the kingdom. Simultaneously, of course, I came to realize that the toxic root of Christianity, replacement theology, was a crime of identity theft. Every prophecy and promise that Yahweh made to his son and his people were all misappropriated, literally stolen from Dowd and Israel to legitimize the bogus claims of a contradictory faith. And I immediately realized that I had to correct my commentary, that to convey the truth, I would have to position Dowd in his legitimate role as Yahweh intended. So therefore, after completing the second volume of Coming Home, I rewrote the 5 volumes of Observations and the 4 volumes of Questioning Paul, now Twistianity, and that led to rewriting the 8 volumes of Yada Yahowah, now 9. And on it goes. I was reading something earlier this morning about something that Carl Sagan had written in his program Cosmos and spoken long ago. And this is something that I share in common with my good friend JB, James Bowen. What Carl Sagan wrote about was that there's a huge difference between science when it is done correctly and religion and politics. Because in religion and politics, when it is shown that they are wrong, they never admit they are wrong, ever. There is no attempt to learn. There's only an attempt to continue to promote the lie. And in science, the goal is to continue to learn. And if you learn something today that is a better explanation than what you gave yesterday, you admit that yesterday's explanation is not as good as the one that you've come to understand based upon further study and greater experimentation and a more comprehensive analysis of the facts. And you grow not only in understanding, but also in credibility when you're able to do that. And I don't know what the reason was, but I can tell you that among authors, having written 35 books, that's a lot of books. I've probably written actually 40 if you count all of them. Authors, and particularly now people that do what I'm doing now and speak openly, hate to admit that they're wrong. That's why I tell people all the time they want to go out and send my books to somebody who has a radio show or who is an author. And I said, don't bother. You are not going to change their mind. They are not going to admit they're wrong because, well, quite frankly, by admitting you're wrong, you have to rewrite everything that you have done to correct it for what is true. And they don't want to do that. But I did, and I have. And it's one of the most, I think, verifying and authenticating aspects of this mission. A willingness to learn, to make the connections, to understand, to grow, and to correct the record when we learn more than we knew previously. And so I've always been eager to correct the record and to continue to learn. And I think it adds tremendous credibility to what Yahweh is saying through me. And that it is so different than the data dump concept of, well, you start off with all knowledge. That'd make life meaningless. None of us would have any value if that's what God did. And there'd be no purpose for us living throughout eternity. It's all about learning and growing and adapting as we learn more. When this is done, and had I completed all of these rewrites, I turned my attention to the 2 books that were written in Babylon and composed the 3rd volume under the banner Babel. They are eye-openers to be sure. I was able to prove that Daniel was not a prophet and that Ezekiel actually spoke for Satan. By the way, what that means for future prophecy is there is no valley of the dry bones. There is no Gog. There is no Magog federation. There will be no Armageddon war. There's only one battle, and that pursuant to Israel anyway, and it's Alaska Flood 2.0. It's going to begin in June of 2027. It's going to be devastating for Israel. So it is then with eager anticipation that I returned at that time to coming home, and I started writing the third volume, which I've now completed, and now are beginning the fourth volume of Coming Home. I was translating the Mizmor again that I realized that Dowd had volunteered to fulfill the initial 3 Moed Mikra with Yahweh's support, and that he used the moods that convey volition and choice, desire, in first and second person in his conversations with God to say, this is what I want and you support it. And then he explained the reasons. And it isn't until you can understand how Dowd figured out on his own initiative that he should volunteer to be the Passover lamb. And I came to the same conclusion reading the story in Bereshith, the first book of the Torah, pursuant to Abraham and Yishak on Mount Moriah in 1968 BCE. And if I could come to that conclusion, I am certain that Dowd did as well. And then I came to the conclusion, even before I knew a fraction of what I've come to know about the Torah, and how Dowd would have figured out that Moshe was a man of exemplary character, and yet he could not lead Israel. He gave up, wanted God to kill him. Even God couldn't lead Israel. He gave up. And Dowd himself gave up during the Absalom rebellion. Israel's impossible, and he knew it. And so something had to be done to earn Israel's respect. Otherwise, the job that God wanted him to do as returning king would have been impossible and would have been miserable. And therefore, enduring 2 horrendous days at the hand of the beast of Rome and then Hasatan, the adversary, on earth and then in hell, was the answer. He could fulfill Pesach, Matzah, and Bekurim. And although it would be 2 horrendous days, it would provide value for everyone for all eternity. It was the right call. And he did it. And so once you realize that, now you have a most profound truth, the greatest discovery in human history to share with the world. So to be king forever, Dowd knew that he would have to earn his people's respect, and the best way to do that was to fulfill Pesach and Matzah, leading to Bekurim, 2 days of agony and hell for eternal admiration and respect. In the process, he would save his people, please his Father. Only one problem. No one noticed until now. And so if you want to know why God chose a Choder, a Nakar, a lesser luminary, a final Zeroah, a herald for the king, a cold voice to show the way, that's the reason. That is the reason. To reveal that the entire Christian New Testament is false, that Jesus never existed, and the actual Messiah and Son of God who fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bekurim is Dowd David. The purpose of my life. And not just my life. The life of everyone who will participate in the Shabuw'ah harvest, the Taruw'ah gleaning, and the benefit of the sacrifice of the Adam of Parah, such that they can be present when Dowd returns with Yahweh on Kippurim and enter and celebrate the earth being returned to the conditions of Eden beginning on Sukkah. No one, not in all of human history, put all that together for you to understand and capitalize upon. That is the purpose of the Yahweh blog. That is why we're here. That is why the website exists with all of these books at yadayah.com, all free. There's no greater truth in the universe. So today, we should all treasure the realization that Dowd is this gift, our reward, and that we should display an unequivocal admiration for the role that Dowd to David plays in Yahweh's plans and in our salvation. And to highlight this discovery, there are several reoccurring themes that run throughout Yahshua Isaiah, the great prophet. Foremost among them is painting the proper prophetic portrait of Dowd. And this was done here because he is the fulcrum of God's unfolding plan of redemption. Now, second to that, at least here in Yahshua Isaiah, is the realization that a goy will be deployed by Yahweh to call his people home by disclosing this treasure. And this, ladies and gentlemen, may be among the most reoccurring themes and pronouncements in the totality of the Torah, prophets, and Psalms. This will be the last passage I'll read on this program for you. I want to emphasize this here and now while asking you to pay attention. Ken, behold, look now and see. There is a lone Gentile, a goy, someone who is not a Yisraelite or Yehud. This was written as absolute, common, masculine, singular. One specific and particular individual who is not ethnically or religiously Jewish. It is singular in 1 QISA, the great Isaiah scroll. So I want to emphasize this here and now while asking you to pay attention. There is a lone goy, a Gentile, whom you consistently fail to recognize and acknowledge, who you don't know is Yada, Lo Yada, whom you can actually read calling out to you, Kara, continuing to offer you an invitation, which you can recite, summoning you by making announcements to welcome you, calling you out to a meeting with ongoing benefits over time. In addition, furthermore, this lone goy, who is neither acknowledged nor respected by you, and who possesses information you fail to comprehend because you don't know Yada, shall be, and now has hurriedly been brought before you on behalf of Yahweh to approach the set-apart one of Yisrael. For indeed, he is reaffirming your status, lifting you up by shaking the tree and knocking off the fruit so that you can be gleaned, preparing you for the final harvest. Yahshua, Yahweh saves, Isaiah 55:5. My friends, I can, and maybe I will, speak an hour on this particular statement. because it is so rich in insights. But I will begin to unpack it now, and we will return to it assuredly in our next program, because prophecy just doesn't get any more relevant than this. So after telling you that you need to listen to Yahweh and walk to him, and that this is the way to extend the life of your soul, and that the very covenant that God conceived was verified through the love and compassion of Dowd. You are now told that there will be a Gentile whom you do not recognize as Yada, who you can actually read that guy, Yada, whom you can read and recite, who is calling out to you. This lone goy who is not acknowledged or respected by you, that you don't recognize as Yada, is being brought before you hurriedly, with an intense presentation and continual focus on you, not wasting any time, genuinely working as quickly as possible to pursue you on behalf of Yahweh, your God. Yahweh, not Hashem, not G-D, not Adonai, not Jesus, not Christ, not Allah. Yahweh, your God. To approach the set-apart one of Yisrael. Who is the set-apart one of Yisrael? There are two people, or two individuals that qualify. Yahweh is set apart, and he is forever associated with Yisrael, individuals who engage and endure with God. But when God designates a singular person, that he says that this person is the Kadosh, the most set apart, he introduces that individual and designates him as Dowd, his beloved son. He is the set apart one of Israel. To approach one, by the way, is to approach the other. When they return, they are returning together. Yahweh and Dowd. So indeed, he is reaffirming your status. Israel, you have been demeaned by Judaism, by Christianity, and by Islam. You've forsaken your status with God. It's been robbed from you by Christians and Muslims, but you've forfeited it through Judaism as well. And so the person who is now restoring your status, recalling you as Yahud, Yahweh and Dowd, Yahweh's beloved, the person who is reaffirming your status as the chosen people, so that you choose God back, so that you accept your inheritance, so that you return to God so he can return to you. The one who is reaffirming your status as the chosen people and shaking his tree, the reason that is written here, knocking off the fruit so you can be gleaned, is it is this goy's responsibility to do that very thing as the choder, as that stick that beats the olive tree, as Yahshua explained in the 17th chapter of this very book. To glean the 2 or 3, representing 2 or 3,000. Yehudim and the uppermost branches, and the 4,000 or 5,000 Israelites who were cut off in the lower branches on Taruw'ah. The evening of Taruw'ah before the following day, as then the sacrifice of the Adam of Parah. He is restoring your status both ways so that you can be gleaned. We'll return to the statement in our next program on Qatsyr harvest, but it's almost impossible to overemphasize how important the revelation that Yahweh made through Yahshua is now to our lives, to the lives of the covenant family, to the lives of Yisrael, such that we understand what God is saying and what it means to us in the here and now. So I thank you so much for listening. May you have a wonderful day.